Okay, we're going to shift things to a parenting topic now. Is yelling at your child ever okay? A parent wrote to Slate saying that they usually try to avoid shouting, but they were surprised how effective it was when they had to shout at their 4-year-old. So, are there times when yelling works best?
Well, Melissa wrote to us on Facebook and she said parents aren't robots. So sometimes, if talking and other methods haven't worked, patience can be scarce. Kids are lucky these days. When I was young, we just got spanked without questions. So a bit of yelling is understandable. I hear you, Melissa. I remember when I was a kid, my dad would sometimes like raise his voice, and my sister and I would be like, "Dad, stop yelling." And his go to line was always, "This isn't yelling. You think this is yelling? This is yelling." And he would just like scream in our faces for a second, and we would be like, ah. But I mean, for the most part, I feel like I was raised in a home that was obviously very loving, and there wasn't a lot of a ton of yelling. I feel like whenever I have raised my voice with Jai, I don't feel good about it afterwards. He's very sensitive to even like the slightest bit of tone.
Mhm.
And what I've noticed is that sometimes it's more effective to actually lower my voice to get his
Mhm.
attention. Like I've seen that sometimes, like camp counselors or teachers do this, where everything's quite frenetic, and instead of yelling above that to try to get attention, it's easier to just go way low. Because ultimately, as an adult, you don't want people yelling at you either. So I think that getting rid of yelling is actually a good thing.
Hmm.
Oh, it's so funny because Emma on Facebook wrote to us and she writes something along those lines. And she says, would you yell at your colleagues at work, your boss, or employees that report to you? No, you would get fired or reprimanded. So why do you think it's okay to do it to your kids? Yelling doesn't solve, doesn't motivate, and doesn't make anyone feel good. I mean, listen, you're absolutely right, Emma. I think a lot of most reasonable people understand that. But we're human. And sadly, sometimes we treat the people closest to us the worst because either familiarity breeds contempt, maybe because you know they can't leave you. Your 4-year-old's not going to say, "That's it. I've had enough and I'm leaving this house." But we're human. Like you said, Sin, I think generationally there's such a big difference. Child psychology and thinking about the impact of your behavior on your kids, that just wasn't a thing when we were little kids growing up. And that's why there was things like corporal punishment, spanking, and the like. But I think we've come a long way, thank goodness. And yes, aside from very seriously damaging behavior in a home where it is chronic abuse or addiction or just a very challenging or difficult home life, that is very serious, and I don't want to minimize that. When I think about my own family, I'm human. And what I do very differently than my parents is we don't yell in this house. So when you do, it's because you really, really need to. But then there's reminders like you said, I feel so terribly after. There's a great Instagram account that I've been following, especially during the pandemic, and it is at healthy parenting underscore healthy kids. And there's reminders because there's a lot of stress during this pandemic. We're losing it all the time. And that is a question of self control and self discipline, but it's also a question of stress. And there's reminders on there that say things like choices made from impulse cannot be undone, choose wisely. And here's one of my favorites: anger is a feeling, not a parenting tool. So I think that generally I'm trying to not yell, but sometimes if I lose it, I will actually apologize to Marquesa. And I don't think that that's something that my parents ever did growing up for yelling at me. It was just like, I'm the parent and that's the way I parent. Whereas now I want to let Marquesa know I'm human. I'm so sorry I lost it. I'm going to try not to do it again.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mel, I think that the key there too is what you said. You said, we don't yell in this house, and those are the rules of your house. And similarly, in most workplaces, especially, for our viewers and where we're accustomed to, of course, there's no yelling, and that's not the way people communicate. Although I will say there are some communities where yelling is just the way people communicate. It's the standard. I know that because I was raised in one. Um, my grandmother
Yeah.
ran a mahjong club. So, in a mahjong club, when the tiles are clacking across 8 different tables, yelling is the default volume. If you don't yell, you're not heard. So, I was yelled at my whole childhood in Hong Kong. If you if you go to a Chinese barbecue restaurant and there's a lineup and you stand Western style, very politely and meekly, and you say, "Hello, can I please be serviced? Can I have 2 pounds?" Nobody's going to hear you unless you say, "Hey, Leung Bong, cha siu bao, cha siu, over here." You have to be rude. Yasik always laughs at the fact that I become a different person when I'm in a Chinese environment, because you're not served if you're not assertive in the way that that community is used to speaking. So it's just something that I've always like tried to remember, because when I grew up, it was just loud all the time. And I will say that I was okay. If my mother was yelling at me,
Yeah.
I felt good. The minute my ma shut down and I didn't hear from her and it was all silence, that's when I started trembling and fearing for my life, because I knew
Yeah.
I was in deep diarrhea. So there is something. I'm not saying everybody out there, calm down. I'm not saying yell at your kids. I'm just saying in some
No.
communities that is normal.
And not only that, but there are some instances where I think yelling is warranted. I can count on one hand the number of times I was yelled at, but one time was important. I was going to show off to my dad that I could ride a two-wheel bike, and I went on the road and I was going the wrong way. And he, I was thinking, he's going to be so proud of me. And he was like, get off your bike. And I was like, what? But guess what? I never went down the wrong way on the road. That's the difference between a workplace and kids in a family, I think. And here's a novel idea for all the little kids watching. And I know you're watching. How about not doing the bad stuff that make your parents yell at you? How about saving your meltdowns? Save your meltdowns for when you're an adult, for when it really counts. Like you don't get to choose what you want for dinner that night. Grow up.